May 17, 1943. The cold, murky waters of the North Atlantic, 450 miles east of Newfoundland. Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartenstein of the German Kriegsmarine stood in the conning tower of U-156, scanning the horizon through his binoculars with growing disbelief. What he had initially thought was a small American convoy had materialized into something far more terrible, an armada so vast it stretched beyond the curve of the earth. The veteran submariner believed his wolf pack would feast today on vulnerable Allied shipping. Instead, he was about to witness the overwhelming might that would ultimately seal the fate of the Third Reich submarine force. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how a German U-boat commander came face-to-face with America's industrial juggernaut, and how that encounter would shatter not just his tactical expectations, but the entire foundation of Nazi Germany's wartime confidence. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical juncture. The German U-boat fleet, under the command of Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, had been waging a devastatingly effective campaign against Allied shipping. Their strategy was simple yet lethal: strangle Britain's supply lines and force her surrender before American industrial might could fully mobilize. With 432 U-boats at his disposal, Donitz believed victory in the Atlantic was within Germany's grasp. German propaganda assured both civilians and military personnel alike that American production capabilities were vastly overestimated, a myth perpetuated by Jewish financiers, they claimed. Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartenstein was among the Kriegsmarine's most accomplished submarine commanders. At 34 years old, with a Knight's Cross with oak leaves adorning his uniform, Hartenstein had already sunk 19 Allied vessels totaling 97,504 tons. His reputation within the submarine service was legendary, particularly after his controversial but humane rescue of 400 survivors from the British troopship Laconia in September 1942, even radioing Allied forces to arrange their safe passage, an act of chivalry that led to the infamous Laconia Order forbidding such rescues in the future. "We will bleed Britain white," Hartenstein had told his executive officer, Oberleutnant Gustav Meyer, just days before their fateful patrol began. "America cannot build ships faster than we can sink them. It is a mathematical impossibility." Meyer, a 26-year-old from Hamburg with a degree in engineering from Berlin Technical University, had nodded in agreement, though privately he harbored growing doubts. The increasing frequency of air attacks on their wolf packs suggested the Allies were adapting, and reports from other U-boats spoke of improved convoy protection. Still, he trusted Hartenstein implicitly. The captain lieutenant had brought them safely through 11 prior patrols. U-156 was a Type IXE U-boat, one of Germany's long-range submarine workhorses. At 76.8 meters long, displacing 1,120 tons when surfaced, and armed with 6 torpedo tubes and 22 torpedoes, she was designed to operate far from home ports for extended periods. But she was also showing her age. 19 months of hard service had left her diesel engines increasingly unreliable, and replacement parts were becoming scarce as Germany's resources stretched thinner. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a very different reality was unfolding in American shipyards. The United States had undertaken the most ambitious shipbuilding program in human history. In 1941, the total output from American yards was approximately 1.1 million tons of shipping. By 1942, that number had exploded to 5.3 million tons, and 1943 would see an astonishing 11.5 million tons produced. At the heart of this miracle was the Liberty ship, a vessel that could be assembled in an average of 42 days at the beginning of the war, but by 1943, the record stood at just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes from keel laying to launch. Rear Admiral Howard L. Vickery of the U.S. Maritime Commission had famously remarked to reporters, "We are now building ships faster than the Germans can sink them, and we're just getting started." When asked about German submarine effectiveness, he had simply smiled and said, "Let them count our ships if they can." The American admiral's confidence was not misplaced. In January 1943 alone, American shipyards had delivered 106 new vessels. Henry Kaiser's revolutionary assembly line shipbuilding techniques were producing one new Liberty ship every 8 hours. Meanwhile, German shipyards, struggling under the weight of material shortages and Allied bombing, managed to produce only 20 new U-boats in the same month, even as losses mounted. This industrial disparity was unknown to Hartenstein and his crew of 53 men as they patrolled the cold waters of the North Atlantic on that fateful May morning in 1943. For 17 days, they had hunted without success, finding only empty ocean where intelligence had suggested convoys might be. Morale was deteriorating, and supplies were running low. They needed a victory. Smoke on the horizon, called out Bootsmat, petty officer Carl Lindemann from his lookout position. Bearing 075. Distance approximately 15 kilometers. Hartenstein rushed to his periscope, his heart racing with anticipation. Through the optics, he could make out what appeared to be the smoke columns from several vessels moving west to east. A convoy, perhaps heading from North America to Britain. Battle stations, he ordered calmly, his voice betraying none of the excitement he felt. The familiar alarm sent men scrambling through the narrow corridors of the submarine, each moving to their assigned positions with practiced efficiency. "Prepare to dive," Hartenstein commanded. "We will approach underwater and assess their strength and escort composition." U-156 slipped beneath the waves, descending to periscope depth. Inside, the atmosphere quickly grew hot and humid, the air thick with the smells of diesel fuel, sweat, and machinery. The electric motors hummed as they propelled the submarine forward at 5 knots. 3 hours later, having maneuvered ahead of the approaching vessels, Hartenstein raised the periscope for another look. What he saw made him pause. Instead of the expected convoy of 10 to 20 ships, he counted at least 30 vessels stretching across the horizon. More troublingly, he identified at least 6 destroyer escorts, far more protection than typical convoys received. "Something is not right," he murmured, mostly to himself. "This is no ordinary convoy." He ordered the submarine to surface once darkness fell. The risk was calculated. Surfaced, they could use their faster diesel engines to maintain position and radio their findings to headquarters and other nearby U-boats. By 22:30 hours, U-156 had risen to the surface, and Hartenstein stood in the conning tower, scanning the now dark horizon through his night binoculars. Radioman Fritz Custer transmitted a brief, encoded message to U-boat headquarters. Large convoy encountered. Position 47 degrees north, 41 degrees west. Moving east. Unusually heavy escort. Request instructions and assistance. The reply came 2 hours later. For additional boats redirecting to your position. Wolfpack, Donner forming. You will coordinate. Attack at earliest opportunity. In the radio room, Custer handed the decoded message to Meyer, who brought it to Hartenstein. The captain lieutenant nodded grimly, the responsibility weighing heavily on him. 4 more U-boats meant a total of 5 submarines against what appeared to be a large, heavily defended convoy, still far from ideal odds, but better than attacking alone. "They must be carrying something valuable," Hartenstein remarked to Meyer. "Perhaps tanks or aircraft. We cannot let them reach England." Throughout the night, U-156 shadowed the convoy, maintaining a distance of approximately 5 kilometers, just close enough to keep their smoke visible against the night sky. By dawn, the 4 additional U-boats had arrived. U-502 under Captain Lieutenant Jürgen von Rosenstiel. U-257 under Oberleutnant Heinrich Skrodeler. U-84 under Captain Lieutenant Horst Uphoff. And U-380 under Captain Lieutenant Joseph Rother. As the sun rose on May 18th, Hartenstein coordinated attack positions. Each submarine would approach from a different vector, increasing the chances of penetrating the escort screen. They would attack simultaneously at dusk, when visibility would favor the attackers. But as daylight revealed the full extent of what they were tracking, Hartenstein's confidence began to waver. Through his binoculars, he now counted not 30 ships, but nearly 50. And as he watched, more vessels appeared over the eastern horizon. "Mein Gott," he whispered. "Meyer, look at this." His executive officer took the binoculars, his expression transforming from curiosity to shock. "It cannot be," Meyer said. "This is not one convoy. These must be multiple convoys that have converged. Hartenstein radioed the other U-boats to maintain distance and observe. As morning turned to afternoon, the true scale of what they were witnessing became apparent. This was not a convoy at all, but a vast armada. Transport ships, liberty ships, tankers, troop carriers, escorted by destroyers, corvettes, and even an aircraft carrier visible in the distance. By 1500 hours, Hartenstein had counted over 167 vessels, a number so large it seemed impossible. He ordered Custer to send another message to headquarters, describing what they were seeing and requesting new instructions. The reply was delayed, suggesting confusion at U-boat command. Finally, at 1,700 hours, the response arrived. Confirm count. Number seems excessive. Proceed with caution. Additional wolf packs being diverted to your coordinates. Doubt crept into Hartenstein's mind. Even with reinforcements, how could his submarines attack such a massive formation? The escort vessels alone outnumbered his wolf pack by at least 3-1. Aboard the USS Benson, a Fletcher-class destroyer serving as one of the many escort vessels, Lieutenant Commander Richard Harrison stood on the bridge, supervising the organized chaos of the massive operation. Task Force 60, as this unprecedented armada was designated, consisted of over a dozen smaller convoys combined into one massive protected fleet for the dangerous North Atlantic crossing. Sonar contact, bearing 275, range 3,000 yards, reported sonarman First Class Timothy O'Malley, his headphones pressed tightly against his ears. Definite submarine signature. Harrison nodded calmly. They had been anticipating U-boat activity. In fact, they had counted on it. Maintain course and speed, he ordered. Alert the screen coordinator, but take no action. The young officer at the radio acknowledged the command with slight confusion, but complied immediately. Harrison turned to his executive officer, Lieutenant Jacob Rosenberg. They're watching us, exactly as planned. Rosenberg nodded. Do you think they realize what they're seeing, sir? Harrison's lips curled into a slight smile. I hope so. That's the entire point. The truth behind Task Force 60 was one of the war's unusual strategic decisions. While it contained legitimate supply and troop ships bound for England, its unprecedented size had been deliberately orchestrated as a psychological warfare operation, a demonstration of American industrial might meant to be witnessed and reported by German U-boats. Admiral Ernest J. King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, had conceived the plan after intelligence reports indicated growing doubts within the German Naval Command about their ability to maintain the pace of the Atlantic campaign. Rather than simply telling the Germans they couldn't win the production battle, King decided to show them. Sometimes seeing is believing, King had told his staff when proposing the operation. Let them count our ships. Back aboard U-156, Hartenstein faced a crisis of confidence. The massive American fleet continued its eastward journey, seemingly unconcerned about the U-boats tracking them. This itself was unusual. Typically, once a submarine was detected, escort vessels would immediately move to attack. Yet the American destroyers maintained their positions, almost as if, they know we are here, Hartenstein suddenly realized, lowering his binoculars. They are letting us watch. Meyer looked at him questioningly. It's a message, Hartenstein continued, his voice tight. They want us to see this. Throughout the afternoon, the 5 U-boats maintained their observation positions, each commander reporting increasingly staggering numbers of Allied vessels. By sunset, their combined count exceeded 200 ships, a number so large that Dönitz himself reportedly questioned its accuracy when the reports reached Berlin. As darkness fell, Hartenstein faced the most difficult tactical decision of his naval career. The original plan to attack at dusk now seemed suicidal. Even with 5 U-boats, each carrying approximately 22 torpedoes, they could at best hope to sink 15 to 20 ships if every torpedo found its mark, a near impossibility given the strong escort presence. They would be sacrificing 5 submarines and over 250 crew for what would amount to a minor dent in this massive armada. We cannot attack, he finally told Meyer firmly. It would be throwing our lives away for nothing. Meyer nodded in agreement. The other commanders are requesting instructions. They're seeing American aircraft now as well. Indeed, PBY Catalina patrol bombers had begun appearing overhead, their distinctive silhouettes visible against the darkening sky. The Americans were not even bothering to hide their aerial reconnaissance, further suggesting they were fully aware of the U-boat's presence. Hartenstein drafted a message to the other U-boat commanders. Maintain observation positions. Do not attack. Continue reporting. Awaiting further instructions from command. Throughout the night, the wolf pack shadowed the massive fleet, each commander struggling to comprehend the scale of what they were witnessing. In the cramped and tense radio room of U-156, Custer received a personal message for Hartenstein from Admiral Donitz himself. Your observation's critical. Maintain contact, but preserve your boats. Further wolf packs en route. Will concentrate unprecedented submarine force to counter this convoy. Reading between the lines, Hartenstein understood that Donitz was still not grasping the full implications of what they were seeing. The Admiral still believed this was a target to be attacked, just one requiring more submarines than usual. By dawn on May 19th, 3 additional wolf packs had arrived, bringing the total number of German submarines in the area to 17, one of the largest concentrations of U-boats assembled during the war. Yet even with this force, the odds remained overwhelmingly against them. At 0900 hours, something unexpected happened. An American destroyer broke from the escort screen and began moving directly toward U-150 SIXS position. Dive, Hartenstein ordered. Emergency dive. The submarine slipped beneath the waves, descending rapidly to 150 meters. The crew braced for depth charges, but none came. Instead, through the hydrophones, they detected an unusual sound, a rhythmic tapping against the destroyer's hull. It was Morse code, being transmitted acoustically through the water. The message, when decoded, was brief and astonishing. German submarines. Count ships. Return to port. Inform leaders. You cannot win. Radioman Custer looked up from his notepad in disbelief. It must be some kind of trick, Herr Captain. Hartenstein wasn't so sure. The brazen confidence of the message matched perfectly with the overwhelming display of force they had been witnessing. Aboard the USS Benson, Lieutenant Commander Harrison supervised as his crew continued the unusual acoustic transmission. This part of the operation had been controversial when planned. Directly addressing the enemy submariners rather than attacking them contradicted standard naval doctrine. But Admiral King had insisted. We don't want to sink them, King had explained. We want them to go home and tell others what they've seen. Below the surface, Hartenstein ordered U-156 to maintain depth and continue tracking the armada using hydrophones. The psychological impact of the American message rippled through the submarine. Men exchanged nervous glances, their faith in ultimate German victory shaken by both the overwhelming numbers they had witnessed and the enemy's apparent confidence. Chief Engineer Wilhelm Hoffmann approached Hartenstein with technical concerns. Herr Captain, our batteries are at 62% capacity. If we remain submerged much longer, we risk not having sufficient power for emergency maneuvers. Hoffmann, a stolid 41-year-old from Dresden with 16 years of naval engineering experience, had been one of the most steadfast believers in final victory. Now, even his typically impassive face showed signs of doubt. Can we surface safely after nightfall? Hartenstein asked. Hoffmann glanced at the hydrophone operator who was still tracking multiple destroyer propellers overhead. It would be extremely risky, Herr Captain. I count at least 7 escorts within 2 kilometers. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Spencer, a Coast Guard cutter serving as part of Task Force 60's escort screen, Lieutenant Commander Harold Burdine studied the sonar readings with satisfaction. We've got at least 3 U-boats tracked, possibly more, reported Chief Sonarman Patrick Donovan. They're keeping their distance, just observing. Good, Burdine replied. That's exactly what Admiral King wants. Keep monitoring, but maintain course and speed with the convoy. Burdine turned to his intelligence officer, Lieutenant Samuel Goldstein, a former history professor from Columbia University who had joined the Coast Guard after Pearl Harbor. What do you think, Professor? Is our floating demonstration making an impression? Goldstein nodded thoughtfully. The psychological impact can't be overstated. German naval doctrine is built on the premise that they can strangle Britain before American industry can make a difference. What they're seeing right now directly contradicts everything they've been told. It's not just ships they're seeing, added Burdine. It's the death of their strategy. Indeed, Task Force 60 represented the culmination of an industrial transformation. In 1941, America had just 7 active shipyards capable of building ocean-going vessels. By May 1943, that number had exploded to 72 major facilities operating 24 hours a day, with a workforce that had grown from approximately 100,000 to over 650,000, including, for the first time, large numbers of women and minority workers. Back on U-156, Oberleutnant Meyer pulled Hartenstein aside in the narrow confines of the control room. "The men are talking, Herr Captain. They want to know if it's true, if we really are losing the production battle this badly." "What do the men say?" Hartenstein asked quietly. "Bootsman Kraus pointed out that we've been at sea for weeks and have yet to find a target we can actually attack. Maskinist Weber mentioned his brother works at the Deskamag shipyard in Bremen, and they're struggling to complete just 2 U-boats per month due to material shortages and Allied bombing." Hartenstein nodded grimly. "And what do you think, Gustav?" Meyer hesitated. I think we've been lied to about American capabilities. The numbers don't add up. According to headquarters, we're sinking more tonnage than they can replace. Yet there are hundreds of ships above us right now." Hartenstein had no comforting answer to give. The evidence was floating above them in the form of hundreds of ships that shouldn't exist according to everything they had been told by their high command. After a tense day of underwater evasion, Hartenstein finally received new orders from Donitz at 2,100 hours. Wolfpack attack canceled. All boats returned to base for debriefing. Your observations require strategic reassessment. The implications were clear. For perhaps the first time in the war, Donitz had called off a major U-boat operation not because of enemy action, but because of the sheer futility of attacking such overwhelming numbers. As U-156 set course for its base in Lorient, France, Hartenstein retreated to his tiny cabin. There, alone with his thoughts, he began writing in his personal journal, entries that would later provide historians with remarkable insight into this pivotal moment in the Battle of the Atlantic. "What we have witnessed today cannot be explained by normal production capacities," he wrote. "Either American shipbuilding has achieved something unprecedented in human history, or what we saw was an elaborate deception. Yet if it was deception, why allow us to observe for so long? Why not attack and destroy us?" The only logical conclusion is that they wanted us to see their strength, to report it, to understand the futility of our campaign. In the weeks and months following the Task Force 60 encounter, the Battle of the Atlantic shifted decisively. The turning point that naval historians would later identify as Black May saw U-boat losses skyrocket while their effectiveness plummeted. Allied scientific and tactical developments, improved radar, longer-range aircraft, better depth charges, and the strategic use of ultra-intelligence all contributed to this shift. But perhaps equally important was the psychological impact on the German submarine service. Commander Wilhelm Schultz of U-124, who had also witnessed part of Task Force 60, wrote in his private log, "The men no longer believe victory is possible. They fight because they must, not because they expect to win." The stories of American production have spread throughout the fleet. "We call their Liberty ships rabbits now. They multiply faster than we can hunt them." For Donitz, the strategic implications were impossible to ignore. In a rare moment of candor during a staff meeting in July 1943, he reportedly told his officers, "We cannot win the tonnage war. We can only hope to make the Atlantic crossing so costly that the enemy seeks terms." But even this modest goal was slipping away. By late 1943, improved Allied convoy tactics and overwhelming escort numbers had reduced U-boat effectiveness to the point where submarines were sinking fewer ships than American yards launched daily. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda, recognized the dangerous implications of this reality becoming widely known. In a directive to German media dated August 12, 1943, he ordered, "All references to American shipbuilding capabilities are to be minimized. When necessary, emphasize quality over quantity and the superior training of German crews over mass-produced American vessels." Back in the United States, the success of the psychological warfare aspect of Task Force 60 was being quietly celebrated in naval circles. Admiral King, addressing a closed session of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, remarked, "Sometimes the best weapon is simply showing your enemy the full extent of what they're up against." Our reports indicate U-boat morale has suffered a significant blow. Indeed, interrogations of U-boat prisoners captured in the summer of 1943 consistently revealed a new pessimism among German submariners. One captured Oberleutnant told his American interrogators, "After we heard about the massive convoy, hundreds of ships crossing at once, we knew it was over. How can we win when you replace every ship we sink with 5 more?" The strategic impact extended beyond submarine warfare. As reports of American production capacity filtered through to other branches of the German military, it contributed to a broader realization that the war's outcome was increasingly predetermined by material factors beyond Germany's control. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, after being transferred from North Africa to oversee Atlantic coastal defenses, wrote to his wife in September 1943, "The Americans build ships like we build bicycles. Their material superiority is something we cannot overcome with tactics or willpower alone." This recognition weighs heavily on all of us. For Werner Hartenstein, the revelation proved particularly difficult to accept. Like many German officers, he had genuinely believed in the Reich's propaganda about German technological and organizational superiority. The encounter with Task Force 60 forced him to confront not just a tactical reality, but an ideological one. The fundamental premises upon which the war was being fought were fatally flawed. We were told America was soft, decadent, incapable of matching German productivity and determination, he confided to Meyer during their return voyage. Yet what we saw suggests not just parity, but overwhelming superiority. How can we win against such production? Meyer, the engineer, had been calculating the implications. At current building rates, they replace every ship we sink with 3 new ones. Meanwhile, we lose U-boats faster than we can build replacements. The math is conclusive. Indeed, May 1943 would later be known as Black May for the German U-boat fleet. 41 submarines were lost that month alone, nearly 25% of the operational force, while Allied shipping losses declined dramatically. After returning to Lorient on June 7, 1943, Hartenstein and his fellow commanders who had witnessed Task Force 60 were summoned to a special conference with Admiral Donitz in Paris. The meeting was held in absolute secrecy, with no written records permitted. According to post-war accounts from survivors, Donitz listened gravely to the commander's reports, particularly the detailed observations from Hartenstein. When they finished, the Admiral remained silent for several long minutes. "Gentlemen," he finally said, "what you have witnessed changes our understanding of this war's dynamics. We must adapt our strategy accordingly." While Donitz never formally admitted defeat in the Atlantic, the deployment of U-boats changed significantly following the Task Force 60 incident. Submarines were increasingly diverted to coastal waters and less heavily traveled routes, avoiding the main North Atlantic shipping lanes where Allied air coverage and escort vessels were strongest. For the men who served aboard the U-boats, the psychological impact was profound. The myth of inevitable German victory had sustained them through the war's hardships. As that myth crumbled, so too did morale and fighting effectiveness. Radioman Fritz Custer would later write in his post-war memoir, Atlantic Shadows, that the Task Force 60 encounter marked a turning point in how he viewed the war. "Before that day, I believed what we were told, that final victory was inevitable, that American production was a paper tiger. Afterward, I knew we were fighting not just against ships and planes, but against factories and resources we could never match. It was like watching our future sink beneath the waves." For Werner Hartenstein, the revelation proved particularly tragic. Just 3 months after the Task Force 60 encounter, on September 8, 1943, U-156 was attacked by a U.S. Navy PBY Catalina aircraft in the Central Atlantic. The submarine was sunk with all hands. Hartenstein, Meyer, and the entire crew of 53 perished. In a final radio transmission before the attack, Hartenstein had reportedly told another U-boat commander, "They build them faster than we can count, let alone sink." The legacy of Task Force 60 extended well beyond the immediate tactical situation. While it represented only a fraction of America's actual production capacity, its psychological impact achieved precisely what Admiral King had intended. It demoralized the enemy by demonstrating the fundamental production disparity that would ultimately determine the war's outcome. By 1945, American shipyards had produced 5,777 vessels totaling over 50 million tons, more than twice the global shipping tonnage that had existed at the war's beginning. German shipyards managed to produce only 314 U-boats during the same period, while losing 781 to Allied action. As historian James P. Duffy observed in his book, War Production Miracles, the Battle of the Atlantic was not ultimately decided by tactics, technology, or even courage, but by the unglamorous metrics of industrial output. Perhaps the most poignant epilogue came in 1947, when Fritz Custer, one of the few survivors from U-150 SIX's final crew, visited the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California. Standing before the massive facility, now retooled for peacetime production, he reportedly turned to his American guide and said simply, "Now I truly understand what we were counting that day." Today, few remember Task Force 60, overshadowed by convoy battles and U-boat hunts. Yet this impressive display of industrial might was one of the most effective weapons against Nazi Germany. Clear evidence that the production battle could not be won against America's vast manufacturing power. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.